What floors me about the crunchy to alt-right people is that they talk such a big game about how unhealthy everyone is and how unhealthy our diets are. But the second you bring up things like tighter regulations on what goes into our food, making food healthy, more accessible, or instituting mandatory time off so people can get out and focus on their health more, it's crickets from them. What's up, Crunchy Mamas? Hello, welcome back. And today I am in my car. I haven't done a video in my car in a little while, but I'm back, more specifically my truck. And I am going to be responding today to a video that piqued my interest. I watched start to finish, and it was called the crunchy to alt-right pipeline. Now, it turns out that this concept, that this topic is not exactly new. There are a whole bunch of videos that have been made in this same topic. So this is definitely a thought, a theme that people have picked up on. And today I am here to respond to these accusations, to these videos, to these thoughts, because there were a lot of things that were said in this video, as well as comments that were made in the comment section of this video, that I felt like I just wanted to reach through the screen and reply to. And so I thought, you know what? I've never done one of these videos before, but I've been thinking about doing a response video for a long time. So I'm doing that right now. I just have to say, the lighting's gonna be funky here because we got clouds. I'm gonna kind of move stuff around my little blocker thing to try to help, but just roll with me. So we're gonna start off strong because in this video clip, which I didn't clip like a ton, and there probably won't be a ton of clips. I haven't done, like I said, many reaction videos, if any at all. Oh my gosh, which is crazy because I've been on YouTube for 14 years and I don't think I've ever done a reaction video. But I don't think you're allowed to just clip and take other people's videos, which as I'm saying that, I'm realizing that's exactly what people did to me when we got canceled. By the way, the video and the YouTuber that I'm specifically responding to, his name is Matt Bernstein, and he had a guest on his channel who runs a podcast. I believe it's called Conspirituality, or maybe that's the name of his book. I'll have it right here. So the two of them kind of tag teamed on this video, and that is what I'm responding to. Now, besides the fact that this whole video was kind of aimed directly at me, not literally, but it's me. Besides that, they actually talked a little bit about one of my friends, Tati, or Glam Life Guru. So that was interesting watching them tear her down for things that I essentially agree with and believe in as well. One of the first things in the video that really stood out to me that I want to address was this idea that they kept hitting on, that people that are in the crunchy community are essentially anti-government, anti-science, and are very quick to fall for propaganda. And one of the things that Matt's guest said was that propagandists do a really good job at flattening down a point, at making a very big, complex issue very simple. Just at that point, I immediately wanted to pause the video because first off, I wanted to be wait a minute. Half of the reason we're all called conspiracy theorists, in my opinion, is because it is actually a web of things that a lot of us subscribe to. A lot of us do not believe, in fact, that it is one issue. I think that is a gross oversimplification. Now, do a lot of us think that that is a big issue, that the vaccines are a big issue, that the childhood schedule of vaccines have not been tested together and that's a problem? Yes, a lot of us do believe that. But we don't believe that it's just that one issue. We believe that there are problems with our mass food production in the US. And now, to be fair, they do end up talking about that. They end up talking about the food and the water and something called chemophobia, which means a fear of chemicals, which kind of made me laugh because I thought, man, that is actually a gross oversimplification, a fear of chemicals. It's really not that simple. But in general, I feel part of the reason conspiracy theorist is a name is because there is a belief that there is a whole web of issues there. There's a whole web of problems that are all kind of connected. I know you guys have heard me talk about this before if you watch all of my more spicy takes here on my channel, where I basically say that I believe that a lot of these institutions are essentially holding hands. Now, someone asked me a question recently in my Instagram, and I'm pretty sure I'm going to make a whole separate video on this. But the question that they asked me was, Nikki, I've been wondering this for a while. What would it take for you to trust the science and to trust these institutions? And like I said, that's a big, a very broad question with a very large answer. But a simple answer behind this would be that A, they're not holding hands so closely, that they don't all benefit from each other, keeping each other alive and thriving, but also keeping big business out of a lot of these places. It's very interesting to me that I feel like something has changed over time, where people on more the left side of the spectrum used to sit in this place of like distrust of big business, and somehow over time that has flipped. And I feel like a lot of these people that are really into the science, into trusting the science, are not also connecting the dots in terms of following the money. Now, they did address that in the video as well. Matt made a comment about people who don't trust big pharma, who are like, oh my gosh, like they're just trying to make all of this money, but then they'll turn around and be like, but buy these essential oils, not realizing that there's also money to be made there. First off, I am not, and I think a lot of conspiracy theorists or crunchy alt-right people are not anti-business, anti-free market. Okay, so speaking of being a crunchy mom, I'm jumping into this video to give a shout out to today's sponsor, and that is Bioptimizers. I actually just had a really delicious burger for lunch, and so I took 2 of my mass zymes from Bioptimizers, and these are not only great to help your food be properly digested, break it all down, make your tummy feel good, but more importantly, and the reason why I take them is because this stuff supposedly helps to increase your protein absorption by like a lot. I don't remember the exact number, but I am particularly focused on protein consumption lately. I'm trying to increase my muscle tone, build up my muscles. So that is why I've been taking this. And then the supplement that I've been taking for the last year and a half is called Magnesium Breakthrough. You guys have probably heard me talk about it at this point, but this magnesium is like a superior magnesium to pretty much all other magnesiums on the market, because it is a blend of 7 different types of magnesium. And that's something that I feel like doesn't get enough attention or coverage when people get into magnesium, is that picking a magnesium for your health is really important, like what type you're going to take, because different magnesiums do different things within your body. So by taking Magnesium Breakthrough, you are upping the likelihood of your body being able to not only absorb the magnesium properly, but use it to help with all of the different functions in your body that need magnesium, if that makes sense. So I love this stuff. Like I said, I've been taking it for about a year and a half. It helps so much with just peaceful, deep, restful sleep. It also helps with taking like the edge off in terms of like anxiety and stress. And I mentioned this before too, but as long as I kept my magnesium stores up and I took a pill daily when I was pregnant, this time around I had 0 restless leg syndrome when I was pregnant. Did I already say that? If you use my code Nikki10, you can save 10% off of your purchase at bioptimizers.com. By the way, you can use my code as many times as you want. You could use it every month to place an order, but if you subscribe to like a subscription, a reorder, my code does not work there. I obviously don't receive commission for that, but you can use my code as many times as you want. So we'll have it right there, and back to the video. The way that I classify myself now is being anti-crony capitalism. And a few people have asked me what I mean when I say crony capitalism. And what I mean is basically like fraudulent or corrupt capitalism. It is not true capitalism, true free market enterprise. It is business that is so big that they essentially either corner the market or they use their money to basically pass legislation that ends up smushing out of business smaller businesses or making it so that they can't compete. Everybody has to make money. The world goes around, yes, on money in a lot of ways, but there's a big difference, in my opinion, between people making a living at what they're selling versus companies that are worth billions, if not trillions of dollars, and are not held liable for any mistakes or injuries that they inflict. I mean, that's a big thing that floats around on like the right side of the political spectrum, people that are conspiracy theorists. I'm sure you've heard that like Make America Great Again has now turned into Make America Healthy Again. And there's a chunk of people that say hashtag make vaccine manufacturers liable again, because that's something that didn't happen until the 80s, actually during the Reagan administration, where vaccine manufacturers became not liable for injuries. And I don't know, I think that's pretty crony and corrupt that they can make that much money and there's no, like, they're not held accountable if people are hurt. He addressed systems that hold us back. And the left talks a lot about systems, systemic racism, systemic problems just throughout a lot of systems that exist, right? How many times can I say systems? And the funny thing is, I agree. I think there are a lot of systemic problems, but I think that a lot of them exist because of big money, crony capitalism, yes, big pharma. And I guess circling back also, I never finished that thought when someone asked me what it would take for me to trust the science. One of the biggest things that it would take for me to trust the science would be the allowance of complete and total free speech. I think it is very sus that people, primarily on the left side of the spectrum, think that language is dangerous. Now, I know also in this same video, they talked about the fact that they don't believe that vaccines are something that should be a personal choice. They think that it is something that is like, well, Neil deGrasse Tyson talked about this in his debate with Del Bigtree, that they believe that it is a public health issue, which I'm not saying that it isn't, but that we should all have to come into agreement on this before going into public. And the problem is when speech is being dampened, when speech is being held back, a lot of people don't even have a chance to properly hear the other side's perspective. And one thing that I think that Del highlights in that debate with Neil deGrasse Tyson is that this idea of scientific consensus is not actually so clear. So it's interesting because I've said this before, I feel like, and I want to also throw this out there. I hate that I keep classifying people on like the left side of the spectrum or the right side of the spectrum. I think you get what I mean. It's always hard to decide which language to use: progressive, conservative, liberal, Democrat, Republican. I tend to just go for left and right. And in my opinion, there are a lot of people on the left side of the spectrum that have rejected religion, rejected faith. And in its place, they have embraced not only secularism, but more specifically science. I do believe that a lot of people on the left side of the spectrum kind of bow down to what they deem to be like the very reliable, perfect God of science. And I already said this, but what I think that Neil and Del highlighted in that debate so beautifully is that I don't believe that the scientific consensus is actually sound. I believe it's actually broken. And a lot of the reason that I think it is broken is because of, bringing it back to crony capitalism, because of the amount of money that is in the system. And this is something that I think is imperative for people to really look at: how much money is being made, not only by people at the top, but by all of the people that are involved in the system. And because it is tied to essentially everything, the universities, even the police at this point, I've mentioned this as well, the fact that the police can be called by the medical facilities, by doctors, and told like, hey, you essentially need to arrest these parents, you need to take this child away, and they will just do it. Like, doesn't matter if that person, that police officer individually knows the details, it's just part of their job. I think that's a problem. And like I just said, I think that that is unfortunately true in the medical system, in the educational systems, in the government, in the military and the police. I think that they're all holding hands, and that is, and the big food as well, agriculture, that is what makes me a conspiracy theorist, okay? Not basic, simple propaganda. It's actually all webbed together. There's actually a theory in health and in medicine that exists. You know, there's germ theory, which I do believe in germs and viruses, bacteria, all of that. But then there's something called terrain theory. And terrain theory basically says that you don't just get sick because of outside factors, that a lot of the reason you get sick is because of what is going on internally. Now, that being said, what is going on internally within your terrain, I believe, is directly impacted and affected by things that happen on the outside. So yes, a lot of us believe that there is a problem with the vaccine schedule, but I think it's so much more than that as well. He talked about glyphosate in the video, and that glyphosate has been proven safe for human consumption over and over and over, he said. And I'm thinking like, really? Because I've seen other studies that that is in fact not the case. Or the fact that he mentioned seed oils, saying that seed oils and them being bad for you is, yes, conspiratorial, and that it's just people looking for something to blame it on. But my question to that is, what do you do with all of the anecdotal evidence that exists around all of those topics? You know, he said, well, we can't throw out all anecdotal evidence, but it seems like that's what's kind of happening. I know that personally, anecdotally, my body has experienced so much less inflammation since I have cut seed oils out of my diet. I actually watched a vegan the other day do like a debunking video of a Paul Saladino video where he was talking about seed oils. And by the end of the video, I was like, I don't even feel like you debunked anything, actually. I feel like she missed the whole point of what she was trying to debunk, and that the main point was, in fact, that we were not able to access those seed oils until the last 100 years. So that, in and of itself, combined with the anecdotal evidence that so many people have experienced in regards to the changes that they felt in their bodies since eliminating seed oils, combined with the fact that humans didn't even eat this way, like I said, till the last 100 years, I think that is the point in and of itself. Okay, shout out to the second crunchy, literally crunchy sponsor of this video, and that is Masa. If you've not seen me talk about these chips are incredible. You can't buy anything like them at the store because the ingredients are literally just organic blue corn, 100% grass-fed beef tallow, and sea salt. These things make like superior nachos. They're the best nacho making chips ever. They are not full of seed oils, which you guys already know how I feel about seed oils. It's just tallow, and they're just so delicious. They also make this really yummy churro flavor, and I just can't recommend them enough. We have been having nachos literally at least once a week since we have been eating the Masa chips. Check it out. Shout out to Masa. You make the best chips on the planet. And back to the video. So to just say it again, one of the things that would make me trust science more, the settled science, would be free speech being allowed to actually happen. There should be more debate on some of these things that are supposedly settled in the public square. I really don't understand this whole ideology of language being dangerous, especially if you're someone who doesn't believe in sin. Like, I'm someone that does believe in sin. I believe that everyone is born with a sin nature, and yet I still believe in free speech because I believe that people can listen and learn and that the best argument can win. But if you essentially believe in the goodness of humanity and that people are intelligent, then why not let the debates happen? Why not let people talk about these things? But there are unfortunately, that word came out weird, there are unfortunately a lot of things that seem to not be allowed to be talked about in the public square. You know, there was a comment in this video, it was one of the high-rated comments, and it said, "What floors me about the crunchy to alt-right people is that they talk such a big game about how unhealthy everyone is and how unhealthy our diets are. But the second you bring up things like tighter regulations on what goes into our food, making food healthy, more accessible, or instituting mandatory time off so people can get out and focus on their health more, it's crickets from them." And I have to say, I vehemently disagree with that. Everybody that I follow that is in this crunchy alt-right space has been begging for the US government to ban the same chemicals that have been banned in Europe now for years. So I'm actually kind of all for that. The thing is, we go back to the fact that big money, big food, big ag is in the pockets of all of these other institutions. So when you go to a hospital, for example, what food are you going to be eating? What food do you have access to? Because I can guarantee it's not fresh garden food. It's not healthy, wholesome meals. You know, there was a viral TikTok that was going around a few months ago, and it was a woman who had just given birth in the hospital, and her husband was basically like mad because he was showing the food that she was served for her first postpartum meal, and it was a completely like not balanced, like nutritionally unbalanced meal with low quality food. And I haven't been to the hospital in a long time. In fact, I think the last time I was in the hospital, well, geez, now do I even have room to speak? I think it was about 20 years ago when I had my hip surgery at 16. But I remember the same thing. All of the food was such low quality. It was not given in abundance, and it was not nutritionally balanced. In fact, thinking back, it was mostly just carbs, and not good carbs either. I've always felt this way, that hospitals are supposed to be places of wellness, and in fact, in a lot of ways, they feel like the opposite of that, not like places that foster true wellness. I mean, that's one of the big reasons why I chose to give birth at home, and I was not going to go to a hospital unless I had a true emergency. And this is something that I feel like sometimes people get mad at people who are very crunchy, like, oh, now you want the hospital. It's like, yes, that's the point, in my opinion, is when we have emergencies. But I don't believe it is a place of true wellness. And a lot of that comes down to, like I just said, the crony capitalism factor. I know we were talking about schools and the food that is in schools. A lot of these big corporations, Pizza Hut, Coca-Cola, I don't know, can't think of any more, but a lot of them are what feed the kids in our schools. And a lot of these things, right, I'm not coming up here with exact specific examples. All you have to do is Google them and you will find out what I'm talking about. You will see examples and stories of the broad claims that I'm making. So yeah, I'm all for tighter regulations on what goes into our food, but I'm also for food freedom, which in some ways means less regulation. And what I mean by that is that I don't think, because there is so much big money in our government, in our hospitals, in our healthcare system, I think there's a lot of things that have been deemed unhealthy that are actually the opposite. I mean, right? That's kind of the whole viewpoint with the vax thing. Right now, the big conversation around raw milk. You know, living in Idaho, it is so refreshing how easy it is to literally go right down the street and buy local raw milk, local vegetables sold from my neighbor's gardens, local fruit, local baked goods. I have a friend that opened up, I believe they call it like a micro bakery. I don't remember the phrase right now, but she essentially makes baked goods and sells them on her front yard in like a little stand. And it's so cool. This is one point that Joel Salatin hit on in his interview that he did with Alex Clark, where he basically said that because of everything becoming so big, you've essentially put like an opaque wall between the consumers and the producers. And so if something is bad, if something is tainted or has like E. coli or something wrong with it, there is a wall between us and the manufacturers, and you don't really know like whose fault it was. But back in the day when things were more community based, you know, people develop reputations like that butcher sucks. We don't go to that butcher. They make the best bread in town. Oh my gosh, they grow the best vegetables. Their fruit is really mealy. We don't shop from them. You know, there was more straight up accountability, one-to-one interactions. And I think that food freedom is something that a lot of people in the crunchy community are really wanting to come to fruition. Also, they touched on quite a few times about how they believe that women potentially have a reason to feel this way because they've been disenfranchised by the medical system. And I have to agree with that. I think that the medical system, in my opinion, is one of the few places in society where there actually is like legit misogyny. It is a system that has been run primarily by men and not for the better, in my opinion. I think that women have a more in tune, innate understanding of like, honestly, vibes like nature, plants, holistic treatment, caring, nurturing for babies, for people, for animals. And I think that men, by taking over the system in the last 100 and something years, and I'm not saying they don't have a place, dude, we joke that Dan is Dr. Dan in our household. Like if someone gets something stuck in them, like a splinter, or like Logan got his finger stuck in something recently, it's like Dan is Dr. Dan. But I think that, you know, I've talked to you guys about birth. I think it's really weird when a woman goes into a hospital to give birth that their birth progress is tracked in such like mathematical ways. You are this many centimeters, you are this far. It's very like perfectly measured, and I don't actually think that the process can be perfectly measured. I think there is more magic to it, and there are more layers to the process of giving birth than just the exact measurements that they think that they can make. I mean, case in point, ultrasounds, you know, I think I told you guys this, but at the end of my pregnancy, we were concerned that potentially baby wasn't growing enough, that baby was too small, that maybe I had IUGR. And I was kind of getting a little bit of like, a little pressure to get an ultrasound, but I've done so much research, which they make fun of in this video, that they're like, oh, the number one indicator that someone's going down this pipeline is when they say like, I've done my research. Have you done yours? And I was like, okay, I can be a critical thinker without reading every single medical journal. And the thing is, even if you read these medical journals, a lot of the times the information is then refuted by someone else or taken back later. I'm trying to decide which way to go off on. In regards, we'll go back to that. The refutation that occurs later of science that was once deemed to be true. But back to the ultrasound thing. They were concerned that I had IUGR, which stands for intrauterine growth restriction, where it means that the baby is not getting enough nutrition from the placenta. And a lot of the times in the hospital system, women will be induced for that because they say baby has to get out so they can get more nutrition. And what I deemed to be true through my research was that ultrasounds are notoriously inaccurate, not only throughout pregnancy, but especially at the end. And I started to discover that there were also a lot of women who were told the opposite. They were told that their baby was too big for them and they weren't going to be able to birth them, only to be induced and then find out that the baby was only like 7 pounds. Literally, my mom told me yesterday that one of her friends that just had a baby, one of her younger friends, this just happened to her. She was induced because they said the baby is too big. We are going to encounter an emergency. You have to be induced. And then the baby came out 7 pounds. And in my case, I declined the ultrasounds, terrified because there was a lot of pressure and you want to do what's best for your child. But I said, no, I don't believe this. I don't think that this is true based on my research. And my baby came out 7 pounds, I don't remember, 8 ounces, like an average size baby. And they were concerned that my baby was too small. That being said, back to this whole idea of doing your own research. Something that I like to do, and I don't know, maybe I don't represent a lot of people in the crunchy community, but I feel like I do based on all of my friends that I know, particularly up here in North Idaho. I am plugged into a large group of crunchy alt-right moms, and we talk about this kind of stuff a lot, and we do a lot of research. So even though I'm not reading all of the medical journals, a lot of the people that I pay attention to are on a very large spectrum of beliefs. So like when I was pregnant, I was watching everyone from people that I lovingly refer to as gypsy witch, like, yeah, that's a woo-woo-wee-wah person, all the way over to OBs, traditional OBs who think that home birth is crazy, who quote scientific literature, who make lots of content trying to debunk anti-vaxxers and anti-science people, because I want to hear, okay, what do you have to say? What are your best arguments? What is your best case against what I currently think to be true? But I'm not going to just bury my head in the sand and plug my ears. And so that kind of also ties into this idea of, at one point, he made a comment saying that he interviews a lot of scientists who will kind of humbly say, this is what we know right now. And I appreciate thinking of it that way, thinking that a doctor or a scientist is going to humbly present their information and say, hey, this is what we know right now. Now, I will say that does not tend to be what I see when I do a lot of this research. I feel like I need to put it in quotes each time now because they were like vehemently against all of us that do our own research. But when I watch a lot of these doctors from the more traditional medical sphere, they tend to be very confident in the science that they deem to be true. And I've mentioned this before. I had put it on a short here on this channel. I put it up on my Instagram. But the amount of things throughout history that the medical community has deemed to be safe and effective that has later turned out to be horrifyingly not safe and effective is insane. Like the list is very, very long. And while I do believe, because a lot of these same people are anti-free speech in a lot of ways, they think that speech is dangerous. So I do think there is a lot of memory holing, we're going to make that a verb, that is going on the internet. You can still find a lot of these things online that were safe and effective and are no longer that. I mean, the example that I was giving when I was talking about this in the short was thalidomide, right? Thalidomide. Now, granted, thalidomide, I actually, as I'm saying that, it was not deemed to be safe and effective. It was a drug that doctors were handing out believing that it was safe and effective. But there's a long list of those things. And the problem is, if you've got doctors and scientists like he was claiming that are humbly coming forward and saying like, this is the best we know right now, then I go back to the fact that these decisions should not be mandated. So having the idea that, oh, vaccines aren't just about you, which we don't necessarily think that, because a lot of people who are in my camp also believe that vaccines shed. So even though we're fine with you making your own decisions, even if we think they're wrong, you're actually still shedding on us, in our opinion. But on top of that, the idea of mandating something, like I said, when we've had this repetition throughout history of things being proven not safe and effective later, but you're going to mandate that on people? I mean, it's horrifying in my opinion. And we go back to what I was saying in the beginning about the scientific consensus not being an actual consensus in our opinion. And this is something that, like, a lot of people will throw at me, like the whole thing about doing our research. We don't have degrees. We're not looking in the right place. But what I always wonder is, like, what do you do with the doctors who do have the degrees, who on top of having the degrees have years and years and years of actual medical practice under their belts, that are turning around and saying like, alert, alert, Houston, we have a problem. And I don't mean to laugh about it. It's actually very serious. A lot of those doctors have had their medical licenses stripped from them, or they just get completely blackballed and painted in the media as being crazy, as being outliers. And maybe they are outliers because maybe other doctors are too afraid to speak up because they see what happens when you speak up. And maybe they trust the medical consensus and they believe like, oh man, if there really was a problem, like it would be a thing, it would come out, right? But then we go back to what I believe, crony capitalism. Follow the money. I also just want to say again, this whole idea of chemophobia is not just a fear of chemicals. And he lumped 3 different things into the same category: anti-vax, anti-sunscreen, anti-seed oils. If you're like me, at least, those are separate issues. Those are not just, I'm afraid of chemicals, anything that's not natural. Like, yes, I do believe that we are essentially one with the earth, for lack of a better phrase, that we are ourselves nature and part of nature, but they are separate issues. The biggest issue, like I've mentioned with the vaccine thing, is the fact that the childhood schedule has never been tested altogether. And I don't remember where I heard this, so maybe I won't even be including this in the video, but I heard Dr. Fauci say that they never will be tested sequentially together. So to have all of these vaccines together that are, by the way, built on the back of aborted fetal cells, I talked about that in one of my last videos. Yes, I am aware that aborted fetal cells are not currently used to make each batch of vaccines moving forward. But I don't think that matters. I think it's still heartbreaking. Like, does something that's wrong suddenly become not wrong anymore just because it's far in the past? So there's that. But then also, I don't think that it's like chill and no big deal to be building these viruses, these vaccines on the back of human DNA and then injecting it into people. Like, I just don't. It's kind of similar to the mask movement when people were into masks. There's one doctor out there that was quoted saying that wearing a mask is like putting up a fence and asking mosquitoes to stay out. It's like, oh, they're just going to fly through. And that's kind of what I think about the whole DNA thing in vaccines. It's like, how do you know that doesn't impact people in the future, that it doesn't potentially mess with also people's gender identity? And sunscreen. That's a big thing, right? Yes, not only do I think that a lot of these chemicals that are in sunscreen are not the healthiest for you. That was one thing that they slammed Tati for wearing sunscreen on her face, but not her body. They're like, it's because she knows it's good for you ultimately. I'm like, this is really obvious to me. And the explanation, if you guys are watching, is that we all make concessions. We all, even those of us that are trying to be like purists and we've purity spiraled with like our health, we're all still surrounded by unhealthy stuff that is potentially disrupting our endocrine system, stuff that our body has to detox and filter out all day, every day. And so it's really a matter of doing your best where you can with what you have. Yeah, where you're at, basically. And I don't think that she believes that sunscreen isn't effective at keeping like the sun at bay from causing maybe like freckles or sunspots, any of that. I can totally understand that, being like, okay, I'm willing to take the hit from these products on my face because it's a smaller surface on my body. I don't wear sunscreen, but I do occasionally if it's like I'm going to be out in the sun for an extended period of time and I can't have a hat on, or like, you know, like if I'm river floating or something like that. But I can see this perspective of like, okay, I'm willing to take the sunscreen hit so that I don't develop sunspots. I'm going to be a little vain here. I don't want the freckles, but I'm not willing to slather it on my whole body because I don't want those chemicals all over. I don't want them baked in my skin. I don't think it's good for you. And on the other hand, I actually believe that the sun is good for you. You know, back to this whole idea of us essentially being nature, like one with nature. I think it is so ridiculous. And this is kind of, in my opinion, what they insinuated in the video, that the sun is unhealthy for you. And I'm thinking like, man, can you imagine like thinking that about a garden? The sun is an essential part of that garden growing and thriving. If you don't have enough sunshine, your plants aren't going to grow. Now, granted, we could get off into the details of like every plant needing a different amount of sun, but that's besides the point. If you don't have enough sunshine from the, you know, the warmth and the rays and all of that, it won't grow. I truly believe that sunshine is an essential part of thriving as a human. Oh, one more thing along the lines of him mentioning that he was a cancer survivor and that chemicals essentially saved his life. What I want to say is that there are just as many people that have had their lives saved from cancer using treatments that were not chemotherapy. One could argue that chemotherapy is potentially cancer-causing in and of itself and is a destructive treatment. Now, did it get rid of your cancer for the time being? Are you still alive? Yes, obviously, praise the Lord. But to argue that that is the treatment for cancer, that is the most effective treatment for cancer, I think is very wrong, honestly. I mean, this kind of goes back to the whole institution thing. It is mind-blowing. Okay, wrap your head around this. To my understanding, if your child is diagnosed with cancer within like the traditional medical system, which to my understanding is really the only way to get diagnosed is by going to a traditional MD, and you go, okay, I want to take this route to treat my child's health. I want to go this direction that's not chemotherapy. You are upping the likelihood that they're going to involve CPS and potentially take your child away for not following what the doctor has deemed to be the appropriate course of action. But my question is, how can they even really know that that's the appropriate course of action when something like nutrition is typically only studied an average of 25 hours in medical school by most medical doctors? There's a range there. It's some get less, some get more, but it's not a very wide education. And nutrition, in my opinion, just like sunshine, just like water, just like air quality, that is what makes us human. That is what makes us thrive as people. And if they're not even learning these other things, how can they speak with so much authority that those other things won't help? So much authority that they are able to essentially use the police to exercise their authority over you as a parent. And we go back to their education. Well, a lot of their education, a lot of their textbooks are funded by these large corporations. You know, you can slam essential oils and these other companies that just make money as businesses, but they're not the ones that are funding medical school, that are helping to determine the content of the textbooks that doctors learn when they're in school. You know, it's really amazing to me too that they're so quick to throw out this idea of like, they made fun of that Alex Jones quote, like they're making the frogs gay. And then he says, well, there are cases where the water is genuinely like a problem, like Flint, Michigan. He said, or in LA, our tap water tasted disgusting. And I'm thinking like, okay, so there are some examples, just like how I said in the beginning, how many times throughout history things have been deemed to be safe and effective and then turned out not to be safe and effective or just healthy for that matter. And I'm thinking, so why is it so beyond comprehension that that could happen again, that could be happening right now? That is something I've noticed in general with like just modernity, people living in modern times. We tend to look towards the past and go, oh, those poor people, oh, we're so much more advanced than them. Oh, that could never happen again now. What about the Tuskegee experiment? Like things like that have happened in the not so distant past. And so to think that they can't happen now or they're not currently happening now, in my opinion, is very naive. This is something else that I feel like is thrown around a lot, that the US has the best public health systems in the world. And I don't know that I fully agree with that. I mean, what about the fact that we have some of the highest maternal death rates in the developed world, or the highest infant mortality rates in developed countries in the world? Or the fact, I've heard this said a lot, and I think it's for different reasons, but that supposedly Black people don't fare well in the medical system. And they'll say it's because of systemic racism. I don't know that I believe that. I think that there has a lot to do with like where Black people live within the country, the type of food that they have access to, the type of food that is essentially shoved into their communities, bringing it back to crony capitalism. And I just think that that has a lot to do with everything. I can't even tell you, I mean, I've received it myself in videos, how many people, when they are injured by vaccines and they share their story, the lack of empathy that is extended to them from people that kind of exist within the science community, the scientific community. They are treated as suddenly a danger. That's mostly what I've seen, is they are treated as a danger to everyone else. Their stories are squished. People don't want them to hear it. And they often tell me that they did not receive empathy, that they were treated like a problem, like people that needed to just shut up. The language that we use, it's like, it's so similar, but we mean different things. And saying something along the lines of like, that the decisions that we make are not just about us, they're about the broader community. I would say that everybody that I know is in the crunchy to alt-right pipeline feel the same way. They feel that our decisions don't just affect us, even down to something like abortion. A lot of people will say, don't you care about the woman? And it's, to us, we're like, it's not just about the woman, it's also about the baby. And I talked about this in my last video that, like, once again, systemically, I think there are systemic problems within our foster care system, our medical system. A lot of it has gotten so out of control at the borders. Big business is out of control. Taxes are out of control. The amount of bureaucracy that exists, and in my opinion, in a lot of the wrong places, is out of control. So I guess to answer your question, or my ultimate like closing line in regards to why do so many people seemingly start off on the crunchy side of the spectrum and end up on the far right side of the spectrum, or like that's where it leads them, it is because of life experience, of anecdotal personal experience, because of anecdotal experience that happened with their friends. It's the ever-changing evolution of the science of things that are mandated and then changed later. It's doing experiments on themselves and seeing more results than they ever saw by taking the medication that their doctor gave them, by following the advice of their doctor. They look at themselves and go, wait, how was I able to change this? By listening to influencers, by doing my own research. And it opens up their eyes to the fact that there seems to be a flaw within the scientific consensus and within the medical community. You know, I'm not even addressing really like the whole white supremacy factor that was kind of touched on in this, that they end up becoming a white supremacist, because as we've seen over the years, the phrase white supremacist has been completely twisted. I think it was the Smithsonian that put out like a tweet a few years ago explaining what white supremacy is, that now in this day and age, white supremacy does not have to mean that you actually think white people are supreme above other ethnicities. It's that you believe in certain constructs that they have decided to tie into like the white ethnicity. And so that makes you a white supremacist. And so a lot of those arguments, I don't even know how to like push back on that, because we are not speaking the same language. And a lot of this just comes down to everything I've said. This idea of people becoming crunchy because they have health issues. They are not being served well within the traditional medical establishment. They make changes, they see a difference, and then they start questioning everything. They wonder, why wasn't my doctor able to help me with this? Why didn't they give me this advice? Why didn't they make any of these suggestions? And then it leads them down a rabbit hole of research. And the thing is, and this goes back to free speech, there are a lot of traditional medical doctors out there on the internet making their points, sharing their research. And I'll just say it again, the moms that I know listen to both sides. I was actually just talking with a friend the other day that I'm planning on interviewing on my podcast that will be relaunching soon. And she has a master's degree and works in a hospital as a social worker, but she works within the hospital. She does not vaccinate any of her children. She did not take the COVID vax. She has read the research, and she's had many conversations with the people that have hired her at the hospital, with her fellow coworkers, and some of them have changed their minds through her conversations with them. And so that's the thing. I've just realized that this whole idea of like, you know, what does it mean to do your research, or you're not educated enough, or you didn't go to school for this, doesn't mean anything because of what I said earlier. They're so quick to shut down people that have done their research, or doctors that do have the experience and do have the degrees. So this, as well as many other reasons, is why I'm very anti-mandating medical treatments. You know, a lot of people on the left will make fun of us for believing in like our big sky daddy, but I just look at them and I'm like, you believe in big daddy government, like that the government can save you, that the government is infallible, that they don't make mistakes, that it is proven, it is tested, and if I just follow it, then I'll be okay. But I don't subscribe to that same belief. And if you're like me, or if you're not like me, well, no, if you're like me and you're open to reading both sides of the perspective, and you want to see a Christian perspective, I've mentioned this book before. It's a book by R.J. Rushdoony, and it is called Faith and Wellness. And it is the only book I've seen out there from a Christian perspective critiquing the medical establishment and giving kind of the worldview, the perspective, the Christian perspective, looking at the medical establishment. And I think it explains a lot. It explains a lot of why I feel a certain way about the medical establishment and why it comes from a certain worldview, and how that trickles down into everything, into how it rolls out medications, how it does experiments, how it sees babies' life in the womb. So, on that note, we'll see if this video ever reaches the light of day, because that was a doozy, and I've never done a reaction video before. So feel free to sound off in the comments. I have now learned from my last few videos that a lot of you don't agree with me, which really surprises me that you're still here. But feel free to chime in, or if you do agree, or if you have more to add on to what I said. I feel like I could honestly just go on and on and on, but I have to end this at some point. And so I'll probably do more videos. Like I said, I want to do a video on the idea of the science being settled, or following the money in the science, something along those lines. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I will, God willing, see you back here soon with another one. Bye!